I remember the sound before I remember the truth. Not a voice, not footsteps, just the soft, steady hum of the refrigerator in the dark, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when walls feel thinner and thoughts feel louder. I was in the hallway outside the living room, barefoot on the cold tile floor, holding my phone in my hand like it was a foreign object. The lamp next to the sofa had been left on a dim, honey-colored pool of light sinking into the silence of the house. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought nothing was wrong. Everything looked normal, cushions neatly placed, curtains drawn, the faint smell of jasmine from the diffuser still in the air. But I wasn't breathing normally. Because 5 minutes earlier, I had opened something I was never meant to see. A bank account. His name. His money. Not ours, his. A second account I never knew existed. And in that first moment, I did not feel anger. Not yet. Shock arrives quietly, like a hand closing over your mouth before you can scream. I just stood there with my thumb still hovering over the phone screen, as if blinking might make the numbers disappear. 287,000 rupees. Transferred monthly. Regular deposits for nearly a year. All hidden. He was asleep in our bedroom, maybe dreaming, maybe breathing with the same steady rhythm he always did, while I stood outside in the half-light learning that my marriage had been lived in two different realities, mine and his. People always imagine betrayal begins loudly, with shouting, a fight, a slap, a scene. But true betrayal begins in silence, in the moment when the world still looks the same, but your heart knows it is not. I remember I didn't sit down. My legs should have weakened beneath me, but they didn't. I stayed standing, spine rigid, like the truth had frozen something inside me. My first thought wasn't even why. It was, how long have I been the only one in this marriage who didn't know the truth? Because a hidden bank account isn't an accident. It is intention. Preparation. Planning lies in advance. I remember swallowing hard, the back of my throat dry, that awful dryness you feel when your body senses danger before your mind catches up. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, scrolling through the statements again and again as if repetition might change the reality. Then I noticed the smaller detail, the one that made my pulse kick inside my ears. A recurring transfer. Same name every month. Same amount. Like a heartbeat on paper. Not a company. Not a bill. A person's name. A woman. Not a sister, not a cousin. Not a name I recognized. That was the first crack. Not the whole collapse, just the first sound of something breaking in a place I wasn't prepared to hear it. I didn't react dramatically. I didn't scream or run to wake him. I just stood there, frozen, the way a person does when the moment they thought they were living is replaced by the one they are actually in. There is a kind of grief you feel while the person who caused it is asleep in the next room. A grief that has no air to breathe because your mouth is still closed over your own shock. I remember the clock on the wall ticking. Tick, tick, tick. A stubborn reminder that time was still moving, even if I was. That was the exact moment, the hinge of my life, when the marriage I believed I had ended, though I didn't know it fully yet. Not when I confronted him. Not when I learned the full story. Not when the truth exploded. It ended in that tiny, silent second when I understood. My husband is living a life I am not part of. I didn't cry, not that night. Tears need permission, and I hadn't given myself any. I just looked at the glowing screen in the dark and thought, with a clarity that felt almost physical. This was never supposed to be a secret, which means it was never supposed to include me. Before that night, my marriage looked like something people pointed to as proof that good men still exist. I used to hear it in relatives' voices, in neighbors' compliments, even in the way women at weddings looked at us when we walked in together, like I had won some invisible prize other women were still searching for. He had the kind of calm presence that makes others trust easily. Soft-spoken, measured, dependable. He opened doors, carried groceries, asked elders about their health with sincere eyes. He knew how to appear present, how to place a hand on my back in public, how to laugh in the right tone when someone praised our marriage. If you only saw us from the outside, you would believe I was safe. And I believed it too. Not because I was foolish, but because he never gave me a visible reason not to. Our mornings followed a rhythm. He woke first, showered, ironed his shirts while humming under his breath, then made tea with the same patience every day, not because he was a romantic, but because he was a creature of habit. I still remember the exact sound of the teaspoon against the cup, sharp, metallic, familiar, before he set it near my side of the table without announcing it. He never said, "I made chai for you." He just placed it there quietly, like proof of partnership. We rarely fought in those months, not because life was perfect, but because nothing had yet risen to the surface to tear through the stillness. We moved around each other with the worn-in coordination of people who have shared a life long enough for the body to remember what the mind no longer thinks about. When he returned from work, he would place his keys in the same ceramic bowl near the entry table, the soft clink of metal against glass announcing his arrival before his voice did. I would usually be in the kitchen, chopping onions or stirring a pot while the evening news murmured from the living room. He would step in, sniff the air lightly and say, almost automatically, "Smells good." It was never dramatic affection, never grand romance, just quiet predictability. The kind that makes you exhale because you think you are not alone in the weight of life. At night, he read on his phone while I folded laundry or scrolled through recipes. Sometimes he would rest his leg against mine under the blanket, not intimacy, just contact. The subtle language long-term couples speak without effort. I didn't know then that a marriage can have warmth without truth, that a man can share a bed and still live somewhere else entirely. There were weekends when he insisted we visit his mother, not with force, but with that soft moral tone good sons use so you cannot refuse without feeling small. I went, because I believed compromise is how marriages breathe. His mother was polite to me in front of him, always beta, always smiling, the kind of polished veneer women wear when their sons are watching. Back then, I never thought to notice what she didn't say. I never thought to listen beneath her niceness. I cooked, managed the house, adjusted myself like water around whatever shape life required, not because I was weak, but because that is how wives are taught to hold families together. I was proud of my role, proud that our home felt steady, untouched by the chaos I saw in other marriages. I remember one evening in particular, months before everything unraveled, when we sat on the balcony after dinner. The city was quiet, warm air brushing against our faces, streetlights flickering in patches of gold on the road below. He rested his arm along the back of my chair. We weren't talking about anything meaningful, just small nothings about the neighbor's renovations and a colleague's wedding. And yet I remember feeling lucky. That is what hurts most now, not the betrayal itself, but the fact that I had peace I did not know was borrowed. Even small tasks felt shared back then. When the light bulb in the hallway flickered, he replaced it without being asked. When I mentioned wanting to change curtains, he drove me to the store that weekend. When I said I felt tired one Friday, he ordered dinner instead of expecting me to cook. Those tiny gestures, that is how trust is built. Not in grand lessons, but in 1,000 quiet repetitions. I told myself often, this is what a good husband looks like. I defended him in conversations, argued on his behalf when people said men were all selfish. I believed I was loved in the way that matters in the everyday, unspectacular way real life offers love. Looking back, I wonder how many lies can fit inside a normal day without tipping anything over. How many times he stood in that same kitchen, sipping the tea I made, while knowing there was a second life he never intended to tell me about. How many dinners he ate across from me while wiring money to someone else. How many nights he slept with his breathing even and his conscience trained to stay silent. People say betrayal is a moment, one discovery, one break. But betrayal is not born the day it is found. It lives quietly for months, for years sometimes, moving through a marriage like smoke through fabric invisible until you hold it to the light. At that time, I still smiled when he entered a room. I still saved his favorite part of the chicken for him. I still washed his clothes with my own hands, pressing out wrinkles like care had a physical form. I still kept his side of the wardrobe scented with lavender sachets because he once, long ago, had mentioned liking that smell. I was building a life with a man who was building a secret beside me. And I had no reason, not yet, to know the difference. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in my hand, the air thick with that artificial citrus-sweet smell from the room freshener I always hated. I had gone in to set folded towels, and his phone lit up with another OTP message from a bank I didn't know existed. By then, the rhythm of those numbers felt like something carving lines straight across my chest. I didn't open anything. I didn't scroll. I didn't snoop. I only stared at the bank name I had never heard him say in 10 years of marriage. 10 years of rent, groceries, birthdays, funerals, and shared debts. 10 years of we, and suddenly there was a me inside a we that I never got to know existed. He came in while I was still holding the phone. He saw my face before he saw the screen. He froze at the doorframe, right hand on the knob, like someone who walked in on his own crime scene. I said nothing first. Silence is a diagnostic tool. It tells you who breaks. He broke. He rushed, not to me, to the phone in my hand. That told me everything I needed about ownership. "Give it," he whispered, not loud but urgent, like oxygen. I didn't hand it. I only asked one sentence, steady, low, almost clinical. "How long have you been hiding money from me?" His jaw clenched in that way men do when they want to manufacture a narrative quickly. His nostrils flared once, like he ran a sprint just to arrive at this lie. "You're misunderstanding," he said, the most predictable first line of guilt. I didn't blink. How long? He started to pace, the packing of someone assembling excuses from thin air. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Then say it now." My voice didn't shake, and I think that scared him more. He sat, not close, not touching, at the edge of the dressing stool, knees pointed away, posture of distance. 3 years, he said. 3 years. 3 years of my gullibility, subsidizing his secrecy. I could feel heat behind my ears before I felt it in my chest. Betrayal registers in the smallest vessels first, the capillaries where shock goes to learn its vocabulary. "Why?" I asked, not screaming, not begging, a simple forensic question. He exhaled, rubbed his forehead like the victim in this scene, then said the line that rearranged the walls of that room. "Because I don't trust your decisions with money." It was almost elegant how he inverted the crime into a critique. My spine straightened so fast the bed springs set a soft metallic tick. I remembered every year I stretched groceries to make his loan payments look masculine in public. Every Eid I dressed light so he could give heavy to his brothers. Every time I said, "It's okay, we'll manage," while he tried and failed in businesses I still defended in front of family. And he didn't trust my decisions. A laugh escaped me, short, dry, nothing like humor, more like a cough of disbelief. "Whose tuition did I cut to keep your credit card from defaulting?" I asked. He swallowed. "What did I sell from my gold when your cousin needed a temporary rescue?" He looked away. "Who stayed up with ledger books when your side business collapsed the second time? Me or the woman you think can't be trusted?" His shoulders dropped under the weight of remembered history. But guilt is not repentance. It is just memory with shame. He tried one more pivot. "I wasn't hiding it from you. I was saving it for us." I almost admired the wording. Deceit always tries to come dressed like foresight. "For us," I repeated, tasting the hypocrisy. Where in this us was I supposed to stand if I never knew it existed? He had no answer, only breath and avoidance. And then I said the quietest, yet most consequential line of that night. "From this moment forward, nothing you say belongs to the category of truth by default." Something in his face fell, not regret, not apology, but the realization that a kind of immunity had ended. A border had been drawn that he could not undraw. He reached out, a hand on the mattress first, not on me, as if warming the surface before touching the person. "Please don't make this bigger than it is," he said. I looked at him the way a judge looks at evidence, not at the defendant. "It is as big as the years you hid it," I replied. He inhaled like he would speak again, but I raised my palms slightly, not to silence him, but to mark that I wasn't available for negotiation in that tone. That night I didn't sleep beside him. I lay on my side of the bed, but the distance between two bodies can become an acreage when trust has a death event inside a single room. At 3:11 a.m., when he thought I was asleep, he unlocked his phone under the blanket, deleting messages, the glow of the screen lighting the fabric like a confession lantern. He was not repenting, he was cleaning. And there, in that weak blue light, I understood that whatever explanation he would build next would not be truth, but strategy. I closed my eyes, not to rest, but to begin planning the universe of my next moves. Because once a woman stops reacting emotionally and starts thinking structurally, the story shifts ownership. The morning after that night felt like someone had quietly replaced the air inside our house with something heavier. He moved around the room like a guest, careful not to make noise, careful not to meet my eyes, careful in all the wrong ways. Guilt doesn't always scream, sometimes it tiptoes. He didn't make his usual jokes while tying his shoelaces. He didn't ask his usual "Che main chini cam to nahi." He just existed, like a man rehearsing his next version of the story. I watched him from across the room without letting my face show that I was watching. His shoulders were tense, his jaw was locked, and his eyes kept flicking to his phone every few seconds, as if he expected it to speak before he did. People lie with their mouths, but they confess with their habits. There was something about the way he kept the phone face down, not casually but religiously, like the screen contained a witness. Even while he wore his socks, the phone stayed in his lap, not on the table like any normal morning. I could almost see the fear of exposure poolsing under his skin. He cleared his throat, not because he had something to say, but because he needed to check if I was listening. I didn't speak. Silence is a mirror, and I wanted him to see himself. He pretended to scroll some news, but his scrolling had the nervous speed of someone not reading anything, just buying time. Then, right when he thought I wasn't looking, he pressed and held an icon, and the motion of his thumb told me exactly what he was doing. He wasn't reading, he was deleting. Not last night, not later, now, in daylight in front of me. A man who believes he is innocent does not sanitize evidence at breakfast. He sensed my eyes on him and instantly locked the phone. "I'm getting late," he murmured, a sentence men use when they want to exit a room that has truth inside it. He stood up too fast, grabbed his keys, and left without finishing the tea that he never leaves untouched. The cup sat there, full and sweating, like a witness abandoned mid-testimony. The door clicked shut. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Anger did not rise in me, something worse did. Clarity. Not clarity about the money, that part was already obvious. What became clear now was that he was not trying to explain the past, he was trying to erase it. And a man who is editing a story is a man who intends to lie again. That became my first real clue. Not the bank, not the account, not the PDF, not the OTP. But his behavior the next morning. A one-time secret is accidental. A continuing pattern is intentional. He didn't look afraid of losing me. He looked afraid of losing the version of himself he wanted to present. That told me something crucial. I was not dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with a strategy. And strategies do not end with discovery. They evolve. I stood in that kitchen, the clock ticking so loudly on the wall it felt like it was counting down to something I had not yet seen. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow. But my vision of him, that had changed shape forever. This marriage had entered a different terrain. One where trust was no longer assumed. And observation became survival. I wiped the counter, not because it was dirty, but because movement keeps a woman from collapsing on the spot where her certainty died. The game had already begun. He thought I would react emotionally. Instead, I chose to watch him with a calm he was not prepared for. Because before a woman moves, she must first understand what she is really up against. For the next several days, I did not question him once. I did not ask who. I did not ask why. I did not ask how much. Interrogation gives liars a stage. Silence forces them to expose themselves without script. And he did. By the fourth day, I noticed the pattern. He took calls only when stepping outside, balcony, veranda, even the staircase landing. Before, he would answer anything anywhere, speaker on, no care. Now every ringtone was treated like a crime scene, and every conversation was whispered like prayer. He became overly polite, not to me, but around me. Guilt makes men behave gently the way a thief wipes his fingerprints, not out of kindness, but fear of trace. Then came the evening that confirmed everything. He came home later than usual and kept his bag unusually close, like a child guarding a report card. When he went to shower, he carried the bag with him inside. Not his phone, the entire bag. People don't carry innocent things into locked bathrooms. When he emerged, I watched him pretend to act normal, humming under breath, checking weather, flipping TV channels without watching them. Guilty men overact normalcy because they know they are not. I sat on the sofa sewing a loose button, a quiet domestic motion that makes a man think you are harmless. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him unlock his phone with that same anxious thumb, and then I heard it. The soft whoosh of a message being deleted. Not typed, deleted. My needle paused in midair. He froze, realizing the sound carried. Without lifting his head, he locked the phone fast, like someone slamming a drawer on a weapon. That sound, that tiny digital gasp of erasure, was the second half of the first clue. Not the money. Not the secrecy. Not even the nominee form. The real betrayal was this. He was building a life that needed to be constantly cleaned of my access. That is how you know a secret is not over. It is still in motion. I resumed sewing as if I heard nothing. That terrified him more than any confrontation could. Men are not afraid of tears, they are afraid of composure. And in that calm, I understood the shape of the situation with frightening clarity. He was not hiding money in the past. He was actively maintaining a parallel loyalty in the present. A betrayal that is finished becomes confession. A betrayal that continues becomes architecture. And in that moment, with thread between my fingers and truth between my ribs, I made a decision in absolute silence. From now on, I would not react, I would document. Because you do not confront a lie while it is still growing. You wait for it to grow roots, so when you pull, it comes out whole. I snipped the thread. The tiny sound of scissors closing felt like an oath being signed. The first clue was not a moment, it was a pattern. And that pattern had declared war on the version of me that once believed him blindly. This was the beginning of my awakening, not my breakdown. Once I decided to stop reacting and start documenting, my entire posture in the marriage changed, not outwardly, but internally. I was no longer his wife emotionally, I became his historian. I began with the smallest things, timings, tones, phrases, patterns. I watched what triggered his nervousness and what relaxed him. When people lie, their body becomes their confession long before their mouth does. I noticed he always checked his phone before brushing and after prayer. Those are not romantic hours. Those are scheduled updates. Twice a day, every day. A consistency more loyal than anything he did for me. I stopped sleeping at the same time as him. A man who believes you are unconscious becomes careless. I started going to bed later, sitting in the living room with a dim light and a book, pretending to read. And every single night he would check if I was asleep before unlocking his phone. That alone was evidence. He started deleting messages even faster, but speed is panic, and panic is proof. The more I withdrew emotionally, the safer he felt, and liars expose themselves when they feel safe. Then came the night that became my first recorded proof. He fell asleep with his phone in his hand, not peacefully, but like a guard collapsing on duty. His thumb was still resting on the screen, his body still in that half-alert lie posture. I did not touch the phone, not even a millimeter. Touching gives the enemy grounds to accuse you. I do not give ammunition, I collect it. Instead, I picked up my own phone and took a photo. His hand locked around his phone, like someone clutching a vault. Not the messages, the behavior. Because in the court of betrayal, sometimes the mannerism is stronger evidence than the content. I began keeping a private digital diary and hidden notes. Not emotional rants, factual logs. Not he hurt me, but he did X at Y time in Z pattern. Emotion can be denied. Patterns cannot. And as I wrote each entry, one terrifying truth sharpened. He was not slipping. He was rehearsed. This was not a new sin. It was a maintained system. And that changed my position completely. I was not a shocked wife discovering a one-time mistake. I was a witness living inside a crime in progress. When you know a man is lying and you do not confront him, something incredible happens. He keeps lying in front of you with full confidence, and every new lie becomes fresh evidence. His excuses started multiplying. Battery low. Office group chat. Bank SMS. Client call. Liars recycle explanations, not behaviors. One evening he received a call and went to the balcony. Through the reflection of the glass door, I could see his face. He wasn't tense, he was smiling. A soft, private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. That smile was more incriminating than any text message. I didn't go near. I just wrote in the log. Day 12, he smiled on a call he had to hide. A hidden emotion is a stronger betrayal than a hidden balance. The more I collected, the clearer the architecture became. This was not about money. The money was for something or someone. He started guarding not just the phone, but his mood. Happiness was also taken away from me and assigned to an unseen place. Men who cheat do not just split finances. They split emotional ownership. He became selectively kind, bringing random snacks home, asking if I needed anything, offering rides. Not out of love, but to soften the ground before the next lie. Guilt engineers kindness like perfume on a corpse. I wrote again. Day 16, kindness appears only when deception is active. His gentleness has a timestamp and a purpose. Then came the night I got the first real clue without touching a thing. He received a message while in the kitchen. I was in the other room, but I heard the notification preview. The speaker was on low but not mute. In that 0.5 second, a single word flashed before the screen dimmed. Tomorrow. You don't discuss tomorrow with a stranger. People discuss tomorrow only with someone who has a future role. I didn't need the rest of the sentence. The existence of the word was the proof. That night I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the man sleeping next to me, and a sentence formed in my mind with surgical clarity. He is planning something with someone, and I am not part of that planning. At that point, the documentation phase reached its completion. I had not caught a moment, I had captured a pattern. And once a pattern is confirmed, the next stage begins. Not reaction. Not confrontation. Strategy. Once I confirmed the pattern, I made a decision. I will not confront a man who still thinks I know nothing. Confrontation wakes a liar. Strategy studies him while he sleeps. I made 3 silent rules for myself. Rule 1, I will not let him sense that I have noticed anything. So I went back to my usual tone, not soft, not cold, normal. Pretending ignorance is a form of ambush. Rule 2, I will not ask a single question I already know the answer to. Questions give warnings, silence gives openings. Rule 3, before I speak, I will have evidence that can't be dismissed. Not suspicions, proof that stands even when he denies. And then I began phase 1 of the strategy. I softened. Not out of love, out of war. Nothing disarms a guilty man more than sudden peace from the woman he's betraying. A guilty man expects anger, not calm. Calm tells him, "She is blind." And blind women are not watched. I started serving food at the exact time he liked. I greeted him at the door. I asked about his day with polite disinterest, just enough to look normal. The calmer I became, the more careless he became. His phone vigilance loosened. He began charging it across the room, instead of keeping it in pocket. He stopped deleting notifications immediately. He started using Wi-Fi instead of data, a mistake all secretive men make, because Wi-Fi gives logs. Silence makes a liar sloppy. Then phase 2, I began isolating variables. I watched his spending patterns on days he left the house. If he said, office, I noted whether he dressed like office or like outing. If he said, meeting, I noted whether he used perfume or not. People do not wear perfume for bank work. I logged everything like evidence in a trial that had not yet begun. Day 23, went out for work, wore perfume, returned with light mood, no laptop bag. Day 27, said he was tired, yet took a 12-minute call in another room. Day 31, bank SMS notification at 11:14 p.m., claimed it was network delay. The more I wrote, the more I understood something fatal. He was not accidentally secretive. He was carefully secretive. And men who are careful have something to protect. By the time a man lies daily with comfort, the betrayal is already advanced. My goal now was not to stop him. It was to let him go far enough that when I strike, the truth collapses in one blow. And then came the evening that required me to shift from observation to step 3 of strategy, indirect probing without him realizing it was probing. That evening was the first time I tested his lies, instead of just recording them. I looked at him across dinner and calmly said a single sentence, one that would tell me everything by how his face reacted, not by what words he used. I said it casually, almost distractedly. Did you ever think about investing in a joint account for emergencies? Nothing in the tone, nothing in the look, just words floating over the table. He froze for a heartbeat, the kind of freeze that betrays the soul before the mouth can catch up. Then he smiled, a practiced, gentle smile. Too practiced, too smooth. And in that smile, the evidence spoke. He was hiding more than money, he was hiding intent. I did not follow up. I did not press. I continued eating as if the sentence had passed into the air and vanished. But I noted it. Every micro-expression, every hesitation, every twitch of his lips, every slight tension in his fingers on the fork. I had moved from observation to psychological mapping. Which lies he tells when he thinks I am distracted. Which truths he accidentally reveals when I give no reaction. The exact triggers that make him nervous. Each day became a laboratory, each routine a chance to collect more data. I was not just living with him, I was cataloging him. Then I started phase 4, controlled exposure. I would leave certain small secrets in plain view, my own documents, a fake account note, bills, and watch his reaction. The way a detective plants a false lead to see who touches it. Sometimes he would glance quickly, sometimes a finger would hover too long over a document, and sometimes he would mutter under his breath, all recorded mentally, later logged meticulously. I realized with each passing day that the betrayal was not just financial. It was a carefully maintained world in which I existed only as a background character. And my strategy now was to reclaim authorship over the story without giving him any hint that the narrative had shifted. I did not confront, I did not accuse, I waited. Because in this game, the moment of reckoning is not in words. It is in evidence, in timing, and in control. And by the end of that month, I had every thread mapped, every pattern logged, and every lie traced to its source. The stage was set. All that remained was for him to step into the trap his own behavior had constructed. It started with a small, almost imperceptible slip. A friend of his called me casually one afternoon to ask about some investment paperwork that he had supposedly discussed with me months ago. I hadn't seen any of it, of course, but the way she phrased her question, half curiosity, half incredulity, told me everything I needed. This was the first time the world outside our house intersected with the secret he had so carefully built. And when secrets are shared without consent, consequences follow naturally, like ripples spreading from a stone thrown into still water. I did not confront him immediately. I had learned by now that confrontation is premature if it lacks leverage. Instead, I noted it, mentally cross-referenced it with my logs, and planned how this information could serve to expose the pattern publicly, without exposing myself. The next evening, I invited a close family friend over under the pretense of casual tea. He was there, sitting across from me, smiling, completely unaware that I had already begun the stage of indirect revelation. I started mentioning small details, casually, things I had been managing on my own, the bills he thought I ignored, the subtle financial decisions I had made for the household. Each phrase was neutral, calm, but carefully loaded. The friend nodded, made gentle sounds of surprise, and I noted every glance my husband threw my way. It was there that I realized how much of his deceit relied on perception alone. In public, in front of anyone, he acted as though everything was normal, cheerful, attentive, involved. But when even a small fraction of the truth leaked into public knowledge, he tensed instantly. That was my entry point. I began planting subtle cues in conversations, things only someone with intimate knowledge could question. He reacted, every single time, betraying the invisible threads of his secret. One weekend, during a family gathering, I brought up a financial topic, innocuous, casual, about joint savings. He laughed nervously, shifted slightly in his chair, and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. But the damage had been done. Aunties and cousins started looking at him with mild curiosity, noticing the tension, the evasive answers. The first real public consequence had begun. It was small, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. He was no longer operating in a private bubble where only I could observe. The world was beginning to watch. And with the world watching, accountability naturally followed. I had not yet exposed everything. That would come later, but the foundation was laid. When the community and family began noticing inconsistencies, the system he had built on secrecy began to crumble under observation. By the end of the week, a pattern emerged. Whispered questions, sideways glances, casual inquiries. The man who once believed he could operate in a secret financial bubble now had the subtle pressure of the public eye pressing on him. It was astonishing to watch how quickly someone who had carefully planned every hidden transaction could falter when the right eyes noticed. By the second week, the subtle ripples became waves. A distant cousin asked him casually if he had any hidden investments, the way people ask about whether light, polite, but loaded. His reaction was immediate, a forced laugh, a small cough, and a glance toward me. That glance was the confession. I had not spoken a single accusatory word, yet everyone around began sensing the tension. Family members who once treated him as infallible now looked at him with a subtle doubt, their expressions sharpening as inconsistencies emerged in casual conversations. Then came the day he accidentally left his tablet in the living room while stepping out. On the screen were reminders, small notes about transfers, and names I had never seen associated with our accounts. I didn't touch it, merely observed, as I had trained myself to do, and noted the evidence mentally for when the time came to make it undeniable. At a small neighborhood gathering later that week, someone mentioned banking regulations in passing, and I casually added, "Funny how some people keep accounts in someone else's name without ever telling their spouse." I said it as if it were a passing observation, not a revelation. The effect was immediate. Eyes flicked toward him, whispers began circulating, and for the first time he felt the weight of public scrutiny. He tried to maintain composure, smiling when prompted, nodding politely, but each smile was a small tremor on the surface of his carefully constructed facade. By now, his carefully hidden financial world had cracks, subtle but undeniable. He no longer laughed freely at family dinners, no longer spoke with ease about joint plans, no longer maintained the casual charm he once wielded as armor. People didn't need all the details. The inconsistencies themselves became evidence in their eyes. It was then I realized the truth about public consequence. You do not need to shout, you do not need to expose every detail. Let the patterns speak. Let the public notice. Lies that rely on perception collapse when perception shifts. He was unraveling, not because I had confronted him directly, but because the truth had quietly crept into the spaces he thought were safe, the public spaces where appearances matter most. And as he sat there, tense and uncomfortable in a room full of family and neighbors, I felt a calm satisfaction. Justice had begun to arrive naturally, through observation, through evidence, and through the unspoken weight of accountability. The stage was now set for the final phase: healing, resolution, and reclaiming my life. The first morning after the public consequences began unfolding, I woke with a quiet that felt unfamiliar, almost sacred. The sun streamed through the curtains, falling in gold stripes across the floor, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my chest loosen just slightly. I did not rush to him. I did not demand explanations. I made myself tea, sat by the window, and watched the street awaken. Birds were singing. Cars passed with their usual rhythm. Life continued, indifferent to betrayal, indifferent to secrets, and in that indifference I found a kind of peace. The days that followed were deliberate and slow. I reclaimed the spaces in our home that had become psychologically occupied by suspicion. I began rearranging furniture, putting small touches of warmth back into rooms that had felt cold, as if reminding myself and the house that life could still have beauty despite pain. He attempted normalcy, of course. At first, he was polite, overly careful, even apologetic in ways that were hollow because he had not yet been required to fully confront his choices. But I did not rush forgiveness. I did not let charm or routine cloud my judgment. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about him. It was about me freeing myself from the weight of his hidden life. I returned to my routines with a sense of purpose. Mornings in the kitchen became mine again, not performed for him, but performed as rituals that restored my autonomy. I cooked meals I liked, not meals that would please him. I walked the street alone sometimes, feeling the sun on my skin and reminding myself that the world is larger than any one man's deception. There were moments of reflection that were uncomfortable. Nights when the bed felt too large, when silence whispered memories of trust broken. I cried quietly in those moments, letting the grief pour out. But each tear was also a reclamation, proof that I was still alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of resilience. Family support, subtle and quiet, became vital. My sisters noticed my steadier presence. My parents commented on how calm I seemed. Conversations with friends were not centered on gossip, but on healing. I spoke openly about the lessons I had learned, how deceit often hides in mundane patterns, how silence can be a tool of observation, and how reclaiming agency is a form of empowerment. Financial control, once shared and opaque, became transparent. I reviewed all accounts, removed the hidden layers, and reestablished clear boundaries. This was not about punishment. It was about restoring clarity and protecting my future. He tried gestures of reconciliation, small, polite, almost timid. I accepted some for the sake of social civility, but I withheld the emotional intimacy that had once been so freely given. I realized that trust cannot be forced. It must be rebuilt with consistent transparency, and that would be his responsibility now, not mine. Months passed. The household found a new rhythm. My confidence returned quietly, like a light slowly seeping through cracks in walls. I began writing again, letters, notes, reflections, channeling the storm of emotions into creation rather than confrontation. One afternoon, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I allowed myself a small, private smile. It was not a triumphant or gloating smile. It was a peaceful one. I had navigated the maze of betrayal, documented the patterns, observed without alerting, allowed public consequence to take its course. And now, finally, I was reclaiming my life. And in that reclamation, I understood a deep truth. Betrayal can never truly erase a person who remains attentive, calm, and deliberate. Pain may leave scars, but those scars are not weakness. They are maps of survival and growth. I also understood forgiveness, though it came slowly and quietly. Not for him, not yet, perhaps never fully, but for myself. Forgiveness meant no longer carrying the weight of anger in secret. It meant allowing the universe to balance itself while I focused on living fully and freely. I found new joys, small and intimate. Baking bread that filled the home with warmth, walking barefoot in the garden, listening to rain against the windows, and letting music fill the corners that had once only held tension. Each of these acts, seemingly mundane, became symbols of resilience. The story of betrayal, observation, and consequence had changed me, but it had also shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the subtle truths of life and human behavior. I was no longer just a participant in this marriage. I was a witness, a recorder, and now a survivor. And in that survival, I finally felt a deep, quiet peace. A peace that said, life continues even after deception, even after pain, and the capacity to love, trust, and feel fully remains, as long as you choose to rebuild deliberately and mindfully. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize that life does not always give us clear signs, and sometimes the people we trust most can hide entire worlds from us. But what we can control is how we respond, with patience, observation, and courage. I did not shout. I did not act impulsively. I waited. I documented. I let the truth reveal itself. And in doing so, I reclaimed not just my life, but my sense of self, my dignity, and my ability to trust my own judgment. Betrayal teaches harsh lessons, but it also teaches clarity. It teaches us to see patterns, to recognize intentions, and to understand that calm, deliberate action often brings justice more effectively than confrontation or anger. I rebuilt slowly with intention, and in the quiet moments of my restored life, I discovered something I had forgotten, my own strength. Strength not just to survive, but to grow, to heal, and to move forward wiser, steadier, and free. And now I want to ask you, my dear listeners, would you have noticed the patterns I noticed? Would you have waited, observed, and acted with patience, or would anger have taken the wheel? Life is full of hidden truths. How we respond to them defines not just the outcome, but the person we become. If my story resonates with you, or if you faced something similar, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's learn from each other's experiences, and remember, even in betrayal, there is a path to healing. If you'd like to support more stories like this, consider subscribing or leaving a super thanks. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most. From my heart to yours, thank you for listening, and remember, trust your instincts, observe quietly, and never underestimate your own strength.